It was a typical morning at the courthouse, or so officers Rick Donnelly and Brent Carnes believed. They saw a lone individual, an easy target for mockery and subjugation. With sneers and a puffed-up sense of authority, they forcibly escorted her to a back room, shackled her, and then proceeded to shave her head, chortling as locks of hair tumbled onto the floor. To them, this was just another day on the job. Brutal, yes, but safe in the knowledge that the system consistently protected their transgressions. Yet overconfidence breeds blindness. They were unaware that the very woman they had just subjected to such indignities was, in fact, the presiding judge overseeing their separate misconduct case. Their comeuppance was now a certainty. Before we delve deeper into this, please tell us where you're watching from around the globe, and be sure to subscribe, as tomorrow's narrative is one you absolutely will not want to miss. Judge Claudia Hayes began her day like any other, the morning sun painting long streaks across her bedroom floor as she meticulously adjusted her silk blouse. Today, however, held more significance than a standard court session. It was the culmination of months of diligent preparation for a critical hearing concerning police misconduct. Her fingers, tracing the smooth fabric, moved with practiced deliberation. She opted for a charcoal gray suit, an ensemble that conveyed authority even without her judicial robe. A profound sense of responsibility settled upon her shoulders as she gathered her briefcase, double-checking that every crucial document was in its proper place. Her badge, secured within its leather casing, was more than just a symbol of her position. It represented 2 decades of navigating a profession that had not always been welcoming. The crisp autumn air greeted her as she stepped onto the sidewalk. Judge Hayes always favored walking to the courthouse, using the commute to organize her thoughts. The street was quiet, save for the occasional passing car and the nod of early morning joggers. The rhythmic click of her heels against the concrete echoed the determined beat of her heart. As she neared the courthouse, the familiar limestone structure loomed, its classical columns reaching skyward, a testament to justice that, at times, felt more like an aspiration than a reality. The usual throng of morning visitors, attorneys, clerks, and defendants formed their customary lines at the security checkpoint. Deputy Wallace stood sentinel behind the metal detector, his face set in its habitual expression of disdain. His eyes narrowed as Judge Hayes approached, and she noted the tightening of his jaw. She had endured his subtle antagonism for years, his apparent delight in prolonging the wait, intensifying searches, and enforcing additional screenings for certain individuals. "Morning," Judge Hayes stated calmly, placing her briefcase on the conveyor belt. The metal detector emitted a beep as she walked through, a predictable occurrence due to the underwire in her bra. Wallace's lips curled into a sneer. "Going to need you to step aside for additional screening," he announced, his voice laced with a familiar note of smug satisfaction. Before Judge Hayes could respond, 2 uniformed officers materialized beside her. Officer Rick Donnelly's imposing frame cast a shadow over her, while Officer Brent Carnes smoothly circled to her other side. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us," Carnes stated, his tone professionally detached. "You match the description of someone we're looking for." Judge Hayes maintained her composure, though her pulse quickened. "There must be some mistake. I'm Judge Hayes." She reached for her badge case. "Sure you are," Donnelly interjected, his voice dripping with sarcasm. He snatched the badge case from her hand before she could open it. "And I'm the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court." "That badge is clearly fake," Carnes added, examining it with exaggerated scrutiny. "Pretty good forgery, though. Where'd you get it?" "Same place you got those protest signs." A small crowd had begun to gather, keeping a respectful distance. Judge Hayes could discern the uncertainty in their faces, courthouse regulars who recognized her but were too intimidated to intervene. A young clerk took a hesitant step forward, only to retreat when Donnelly shot him a warning glare. "This is completely unnecessary," Judge Hayes stated firmly. "I have ID in my briefcase if you'll allow me." "Hands behind your back," Donnelly barked, producing handcuffs with a flourish. "Now." Judge Hayes's heart pounded against her ribs, but she kept her voice steady. "I will not. I am a federal judge, And you are making a serious mistake. Carnes moved behind her while Donnelly grasped her wrist. The icy metal of the handcuffs bit into her skin as they roughly secured her arms behind her back. The humiliation burned hotly across her face, but she refused to grant them the satisfaction of witnessing her distress. "Look at her acting all high and mighty," Donnelly sneered loud enough for the growing audience to hear. "Bet you thought that fancy suit would fool everyone, huh?" Wallace observed from his post, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He made no move to intervene, seemingly content to watch the spectacle. Judge Hayes's briefcase remained abandoned on the conveyor belt as the officers began escorting her toward a rear corridor. Her heels, which had carried her so confidently into the courthouse on countless occasions, now scraped awkwardly against the floor as they propelled her forward. The morning light filtering through the courthouse windows illuminated the faces of staff members who pressed themselves against walls and ducked behind corners. Their eyes conveyed recognition, fear, and shame, yet none stepped forward to offer assistance. The echo of her footsteps mingled with the heavy boots of the officers, creating a dissonant rhythm that reverberated off the marble walls. "Time to teach someone about respecting authority," Carnes murmured quietly, his words intended solely for her ears as they approached a door marked "Security Personnel Only." Judge Hayes held her head high, even as they pushed her through the door. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, harsh and unforgiving, illuminating a small room that would soon become the arena for their power play. The door clicked shut behind them, sealing her in with her tormentors while the murmurs of the courthouse continued outside. The security room was cramped and cold, its bare concrete walls and stark fluorescent lighting casting a sickly pallor over everything. A metal chair, bolted to the floor, sat in the center, a detail that tightened Judge Hayes' stomach. The air carried the scent of stale coffee and cleaning supplies. "Have a seat, Your Honor," Rick sneered, nudging Judge Hayes toward the chair. She managed to maintain her balance despite the handcuffs, refusing to falter. Her eyes scanned the room, absorbing every detail, memorizing every face. Wallace leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, observing with that same self-satisfied smirk. Brent circled behind the chair like a predator, his footsteps deliberate and measured. The room seemed to shrink with each passing second. "You know," Rick began, leaning in close enough for Judge Hayes to catch the scent of his breath, "I've been wanting to meet you for a long time. Heard you were some hotshot judge who thinks she knows everything about police work." Judge Hayes met his gaze steadily. "I know enough about the law to recognize multiple violations occurring right now." Brent's hands clamped down on her shoulders, forcing her into the chair. "Still talking like a judge? Maybe we need to remind you who's really in charge here." The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Rick moved to a small cabinet in the corner. The metallic scrape of a drawer opening sliced through the silence. Turning back, he held a pair of electric clippers, flicking the power cord like a whip. "You know what they do in prison?" Rick inquired, plugging in the clippers. The device hummed to life with an ominous buzz. "They take away everything that makes you feel special." "Your clothes, your jewelry," he grinned. "Your hair." Judge Hayes' heart hammered against her ribs, but her voice remained steady. "This won't end well for any of you." "Oh, I think it will," Brent said from behind her, his fingers digging into her shoulders. "Nobody's going to believe you over 3 respected officers. Right, Wallace?" Wallace shifted his weight, appearing slightly uncomfortable but making no move to intervene. "Just don't leave any marks." Rick brought the clippers close to Judge Hayes' face, allowing her to feel the vibration against her cheek. "Wanna beg? Might make me go easier on you." Judge Hayes stared straight ahead, her silence more potent than any words. This seemed to enrage Rick, whose face flushed red. The initial pass of the clippers carved a harsh line through her meticulously styled hair. Dark locks fell to the floor in clumps, scattering around the chair like fallen leaves. Rick worked haphazardly, deliberately leaving uneven patches, taking evident pleasure in creating a jagged pattern. "Smile," Brent instructed, pulling out his phone and snapping pictures as Rick continued his work. "This is definitely going in my personal collection." "Delete those," Wallace warned from the doorway. "Can't have evidence." Relax, Brent replied, still taking photographs. These are just for us. A little souvenir of our quality time with the honorable judge. Judge Hayes focused on her breathing, slow and measured, as more hair detached. She thought of every case she had presided over, every victim who had sought justice in her courtroom. Their faces lent her strength. Each humiliating sweep of the clippers only solidified her resolve. Rick stepped back to admire his handiwork, laughing at the sparse remnants of Judge Hayes's hair. Not exactly courthouse appropriate anymore, is it? Might need to invest in a wig. Brent circled around to face her, his phone still recording. Any final words of wisdom from the bench? Judge Hayes remained silent, her gaze boring into his with an intensity that made him shift uncomfortably. Her scalp stung where the clippers had scraped too closely, but she refused to betray any sign of discomfort. Getting boring now, Rick grumbled, disappointed by her continued composure. He roughly brushed hair from her shoulders, each touch intended to demean. Maybe we should give her a matching prison tattoo. That's enough, Wallace said, finally pushing away from the door. You've made your point. Get her out of here before someone comes looking. Rick unclipped the handcuffs with unnecessary force. He grabbed Judge Hayes' badge from the counter and tossed it at her feet, where it clattered against the concrete floor amidst the scattered hair. Go tell your boss what happens when you cross us, Brent said, opening the door. I'm sure they'd love to hear all about your little makeover. Judge Hayes stood slowly, her legs steady despite everything. She bent down with deliberate grace to retrieve her badge, tucking it into her pocket. Chunks of her hair clung to her jacket and blouse. She made no move to brush them away. They followed her to the door, their presence heavy behind her. The hallway seemed brighter now, the fluorescent lights harsh against her exposed scalp. Her briefcase waited where she'd left it, untouched on the security conveyor belt. Judge Hayes picked up her briefcase, her movements precise and controlled. She could feel their eyes on her, waiting for her to break, to flee, to exhibit any sign of defeat. Instead, she straightened her spine and began walking toward the courtroom, each step measured and purposeful, leaving her tormentors behind. The federal courtroom buzzed with anticipation, packed wall to wall with reporters clutching notepads and community activists wearing protest buttons. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished wooden benches. At the defense table, officers Rick Donnelly and Brent Carnes sat with easy smirks, their uniforms pressed and badges gleaming. The court clerk stood, shuffling papers nervously. All rise, the clerk announced. The United States District Court for the Eastern District is now in session. The Honorable Judge Claudia Hayes presiding. The heavy doors at the back of the chambers swung open. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery as Judge Hayes entered. Her bald head bore angry red marks where the clippers had scraped too close. Under the harsh courtroom lights, every patch and uneven spot from Rick's brutal handiwork was clearly visible. Judge Hayes walked with measured steps toward the bench, her back straight, her expression carved from stone, her black judicial robe draped over her arm. The thick fabric, a shield she had worn countless times before. The whispers grew louder, spreading through the room like wildfire. Oh my God, what happened to her hair? Is that really Judge Hayes? Someone attacked her. At the defense table, Rick and Brent's smug expressions froze, then crumbled as recognition dawned. Their faces drained of color so quickly they might have been dunked in ice water. Their attorney leaned in, whispering frantically, his hands making sharp, agitated gestures. Judge Hayes ascended the steps to her chair, every movement deliberate and controlled. She slipped on her judicial robe with practiced ease, the familiar weight settling across her shoulders. When she sat, her presence seemed to fill the entire chamber. "Good morning," she said, her voice clear and steady. The microphone carried her words to every corner of the suddenly silent room. "This is case number 2023 CR 405, United States versus Officers Richard Donnelly and Brent Carnes on charges of civil rights violations under color of law." Rick's leg bounced rapidly under the table. Brent stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle twitched in his cheek. Their attorney scribbled frantically on his legal pad, occasionally shooting panicked glances at his clients. "Are both parties ready to proceed?" Judge Hayes inquired, as if this were any other day in her courtroom. The prosecution stood first, a tall woman with steel-gray hair. "Ready for the United States, Your Honor." The defense attorney jerked to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Your Honor, the defense requests an immediate sidebar." "Denied," Judge Hayes stated, her tone brooking no argument. "Are you prepared to proceed, counsel?" "But, Your Honor—" "A simple yes or no will suffice." The attorney tugged at his collar. "Yes, Your Honor, but we have serious concerns about—" "Your concerns are noted. You may be seated." Judge Hayes turned to the jury box where 12 citizens sat ramrod straight, their eyes darting between her and the defendants. "Members of the jury, you will hear testimony today regarding a pattern of misconduct by Officers Donnelly and Carnes spanning several years." The prosecutor rose again, opening a thick binder. "The United States calls Maria Rodriguez as our first witness." A small woman in her 60s approached the witness stand, her hands trembling slightly as she was sworn in. She described how Rick and Brent had beaten her teenage son during a traffic stop, then falsified their report to claim he had resisted arrest. Throughout the testimony, Judge Hayes maintained perfect composure. She ruled on objections with precision, her voice never wavering. Only someone watching very closely might notice how her fingers occasionally brushed her scalp, or how her eyes hardened whenever they fell on the defendants. The morning proceeded with a parade of witnesses. A young black man described being choked until he passed out. A store owner testified about surveillance footage that mysteriously disappeared after capturing the officers planting evidence. Each story built upon the last, painting a damning picture of systematic abuse. Rick and Brent seemed to shrink in their chairs with each passing hour. Their earlier arrogance had evaporated, replaced by mounting dread. They whispered constantly to their attorney, who appeared close to hyperventilating. As the lunch hour approached, Judge Hayes glanced at the clock mounted on the wall. "We'll recess for 1 hour," she announced, bringing down her gavel with a sharp crack that made both officers flinch. "Court will reconvene at 1:30 p.m. The gallery erupted in excited chatter the moment she stood. Reporters rushed for the doors, phones already pressed to their ears. Community activists huddled in clusters, their voices thick with amazement and outrage. The irony of her attackers, sitting in her courtroom now, at her mercy, sparked intense discussions throughout the chamber. "All rise," the clerk called out as Judge Hayes descended from the bench, her robe flowing behind her like a dark wave. She strode toward her chambers, leaving Rick and Brent to stare after her, with the haunted expressions of men who had just realized they had dug their own graves. Judge Hayes sat behind her desk in chambers, the afternoon sun casting long shadows through the Venetian blinds. A gentle knock preceded Marcus Lee's entrance, followed by 2 U.S. Marshals. Her clerk's usually warm face was tight with concern. "Deputy Wallace is here as requested, Your Honor," Marcus announced, his voice professional, but his eyes conveying silent support. Wallace strode in with his typical swagger, hand resting casually on his holster. His security uniform was crisp, badge gleaming under the office lights. A smirk played at the corners of his mouth, the same expression he'd worn while watching Rick and Brent attack her that morning. "You wanted to see me, Judge Hayes?" His tone dripped with barely concealed contempt. Judge Hayes did not invite him to sit. Instead, she opened a thick manila folder on her desk. "Deputy Wallace, I've spent my lunch hour reviewing your personnel file," she stated. "The complete version, not the sanitized one you've managed to maintain for public view." Wallace's smirk faltered slightly. "My file is clean. 27 years of service, 27 years of documented harassment, racial profiling, and abuse of power," Judge Hayes corrected, her voice sharp as a blade. "All conveniently buried through your connections with the previous administration." She began reading from the first page. March 2015, complaint filed by Maria Gonzalez, courthouse interpreter. Quote, "Deputy Wallace subjected me to 3 additional metal detector passes while making degrading comments about my accent and suggesting I might be hiding drugs." Wallace shifted his weight, the leather of his gun belt creaking. That was a routine security check. July 2017, Judge Hayes continued, as if he hadn't spoken. Complaint from James Washington attorney. Quote, Deputy Wallace singled out my African American clients for additional screening while allowing white defendants to pass through with minimal inspection. That's protocol. September 2019, complaint from Sarah Chen, law student. Quote, Deputy Wallace made inappropriate comments about my body during security screening and suggested my clerkship interview was based on, quote, filling diversity quotas. Wallace's face had grown red. These are all lies and misunderstandings. There are 47 similar complaints in this file. Judge Hayes's voice remained steady, but her eyes blazed. All of them disappeared into administrative black holes. All of them dismissed without investigation. Until now. Marcus stepped forward with a digital recorder, placing it on her desk. He pressed a button, and Wallace's voice filled the room. Hold her down tight. Let's show this one what happens when they don't know their place. Wallace's hand twitched toward his holster, but the U.S. Marshals moved closer, their presence a clear warning. Judge Hayes continued playing the recording. His laughter, his encouragement as Rick and Brent attacked her, his instructions to delete evidence. Your badge, Deputy Wallace. Judge Hayes's command cut through the tension like a knife. You can't. Your badge now. Each word landed like a hammer blow. You are suspended, effective immediately, pending federal charges for civil rights violations, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. Wallace's face twisted with rage. You uppity disgrace. Choose your next words very carefully, one of the marshals warned, his hand now resting openly on his weapon. With trembling fingers, Wallace unpinned his badge. He deposited the item on Claudia's workbench, where it slid across stacks of police evaluations and sworn testimonies, representing the silenced testimonies of his victims, finally reaching a public forum. Apprehend him, Claudia commanded. The federal marshals advanced with practiced fluidity, the sharp retort of restraints echoing through the chamber. As they guided Wallace toward the exit, Marcus approached Claudia's workstation. Your Honor, he stated quietly, they will not accept this passively. The police consortium, the established hierarchy, they will mount a vigorous defense. Allow them to. Claudia rose, her hand brushing her exposed cranial region. The lingering soreness from the indignities remained, yet it strengthened her resolve. Each grievance, every instance of concealment, every transgression would be formally documented. The era of suppressing verity was concluded. Beyond her office, muffled exclamations and hushed discussions could be perceived as Wallace was escorted through the courthouse passageways. Staff members who had endured his intimidation for years pressed themselves against the walls, observing with a blend of astonishment and vindication as their tormentor was led away in shackles. Claudia adjusted her judicial robe, preparing to re-enter the courtroom where Rick and Brent awaited. Her hands remained steady as she aligned her judicial cravat. Years of suppressed inequities were finally surfacing, and she was determined to ensure each one was brought into public awareness. Marcus held the door for her, his unwavering allegiance evident in his every gesture. The afternoon proceedings are about to commence, Your Honor. Claudia nodded, her posture straightening. The magnitude of her duty enveloped her like protective armament. She had pledged an oath to uphold justice, and on this day, irrespective of the personal ramifications and the impending turmoil, she would honor that commitment. Claudia sat in solitude at her kitchen table, idly prodding a portion of pasta that had long since cooled. The television emanated a low hum in the background, its cerulean glow casting peculiar silhouettes across her dining area. She had neglected to illuminate the room. The surrounding darkness provided an unusual sense of solace following a profoundly trying day. Breaking developments concerning the federal courthouse scandal. The announcer's voice intruded upon her reverie. Controversy erupts as long-standing courthouse security deputy Wallace Jenkins is apprehended on federal charges. Footage then displayed Wallace being escorted out in handcuffs, his countenance contorted with fury. The scene transitioned to the police union's representative, Rick and Brent, standing at a rostrum, his jowls quivering with feigned indignation. This represents a blatant overreach of judicial authority, the union representative proclaimed. Officers Donnelly and Carnes are distinguished veterans being unfairly targeted by a judge who has clearly lost her impartiality. Judge Hayes' actions today demonstrate that she is emotionally compromised and unfit to preside over this matter. Claudia's fork clinked against her plate. She reached for her wine glass, her hand remarkably steady despite her burgeoning indignation. The union representative's visage was supplanted by a panel of talking heads, each offering their impassioned commentary on her suitability for the bench. The judge's conduct exhibits unmistakable signs of emotional instability, a distinguished legal pundit asserted. Any defendant would be entirely justified in questioning her impartiality following today's spectacle. But what of the claims that these officers assaulted her? A more youthful commentator interjected. Does that not warrant consideration? Allegedly assaulted, another pundit corrected. We only have her account of this morning's events. Where is the security surveillance? Where are the witnesses? Her mobile device vibrated. Marcus's text message read, "Turn to Channel 7. District Attorney Denton is making his move." Claudia switched channels. District Attorney Harold Denton's practiced smile filled the screen, his carefully chosen words laced with insincere concern. While any allegations of impropriety must be thoroughly investigated, Denton stated, adjusting his tie, we must also ensure that our judicial process remains untainted by personal vendettas. I have conferred with several colleagues who share my reservations regarding Judge Hayes' objectivity in this situation. The sound of chanting drifted through her windows. Claudia moved to the living room, peering through the curtains. Two distinct groups of demonstrators were arrayed opposite each other on her front lawn. On one side, sympathizers held placards bearing the slogans "Justice for Judge Hayes" and "End Police Brutality." On the other, irate individuals vociferously chanted "Back the Blue" and "Remove the biased judge." Her phone buzzed once more. "Marcus, Denton is scheduled to meet with the chief judge tomorrow. Sources indicate they are discussing your removal from the case. We need to speak urgently." A police vehicle proceeded slowly past her residence, its spotlight sweeping across her windows. Claudia remained unperturbed. Let them attempt to intimidate her. She had faced greater adversities today and emerged unscathed. The television continued its monotonous drone. Reports circulating within the department suggest that officers Donnelly and Carnes were responding to credible threats of disruption within the courthouse. Their legal counsel asserts that Judge Hayes became confrontational during a routine security screening. Claudia muted the television, her appetite entirely extinguished. She carried her wine glass to the bathroom, activating the stark fluorescent lighting. Her reflection stared back, her head bare, her scalp marked with angry crimson abrasions where the clippers had bitten too deeply. The union's pronouncements echoed, emotionally unstable. Denton's veiled threat, personal vendetta, the pundits' queries. Where is the evidence? They harbored the belief that they could suppress this matter as they had suppressed Wallace's complaints. They envisioned portraying her as hysterical, erratic, and unfit. They presumed they could subjugate her with threats and coercion, mirroring their subjugation of countless victims prior. Her hand traced the textured patches on her scalp. Each scrape, each laceration, bore witness to the truth they sought to obscure. Her exposed head was not a symbol of disgrace. It was tangible proof of their brutality, their hubris, their unwavering certainty that they would never face accountability. Outside, the clamor intensified. Her phone vibrated with further warnings, additional threats, renewed calls for her dismissal. The television silently replayed footage of her entering the courtroom, bald and unyielding. Claudia leaned closer to the mirror, locking eyes with her own reflection. Her gaze was clear, her jaw set with unwavering determination. She perceived no victim in her mirrored image, only fortitude, only tenacity, only the unshakable commitment to justice that had guided her throughout her professional life. "They will not break me," she whispered to her reflection. These were not expressions of hope or supplication. They were assertions of fact, as immutable as the very fabric of law. The demonstrators could vocalize their discontent. The union could issue its threats. the district attorney could orchestrate his machinations. However, they had committed a critical error this morning. They had unequivocally revealed their true nature, their operational methodology, and their perceived impunity. Now she would reveal her own essence to them. Her fingers traced the smooth skin of her scalp one final time, and she straightened her posture. In the mirror, a judge was reflected. Not a victim, not a target, but a federal judge who had taken an oath to uphold justice, and that was precisely her intention. "They will not break me," she reiterated, her voice imbued with increased conviction. Her reflection mirrored her affirmation, poised for whatever the ensuing day might bring. The morning sunlight streamed through the lofty windows of Claudia's chambers, casting elongated shadows across her polished writing surface. Her new reality felt disorienting. The cool air caressing her exposed scalp, the hushed murmurs that accompanied her through the courthouse corridors, the mixture of commiseration and deference in people's gazes. Marcus paced before her desk, clutching a substantial manila folder. His customary composure had yielded to an agitated energy. "Someone slipped this beneath my apartment door last night," he stated, placing the folder on her desk. "No name, no note, but judge." His voice lowered to a whisper. "This is explosive." Claudia carefully opened the folder, unfurling its contents across her desk. Internal affairs evaluations, civilian grievances, medical documentation, email exchanges, years of meticulously documented malfeasance, all carefully suppressed. "Observe the discernible pattern," Marcus instructed, indicating highlighted sections. Donnelly and Carnes collaborated for 6 years. Each instance of alleged excessive force is invariably linked to the same individuals. Wallace overseeing security, internal affairs, suppressing the complaints, union representatives impeding investigations. Claudia's fingertips traced a photograph depicting a young man's bruised countenance. The accompanying report had been classified as unfounded despite multiple eyewitness accounts. "How many?" she inquired. 27 complaints within 6 years, Marcus responded. "All concealed, all involving minority individuals or demonstrators, and those are merely the instances that were formally recorded." A knock at her chamber door caused them both to start. Marcus swiftly gathered the documents, preparing to conceal them, but Claudia raised a hand. "Enter," she called out. A man stepped inside. Approximately in his early 40s, dressed in civilian attire, a detective's badge affixed to his belt, weary eyes that had witnessed an overwhelming amount. He quietly closed the door behind him. "Detective Alan Price," he introduced himself, his voice subdued. "I apologize for the intrusion, Your Honor, but—" He glanced at Marcus. "My clerk is present," Claudia stated firmly. "What can I do for you, Detective?" Price's shoulders visibly relaxed with a palpable sense of relief. "I've been anticipating someone finally standing up to them. When I witnessed what transpired with you yesterday," he shook his head, "I can no longer remain silent." Claudia gestured to a chair. Price sat, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "I worked with Donnelly and Carnes for 3 years in narcotics," he began. "I observed them planting evidence, fabricating reports, mistreating suspects, consistently targeting specific demographics. Whenever I attempted to report it, Wallace would misplace the paperwork. When I persisted, my cases began to unravel. Evidence would vanish. Witnesses would retract their statements." Marcus presented a legal pad. "We will require specific details, dates, and names." Price nodded. "I maintained records, detailed notes, copies of original reports before they were altered, even some audio recordings. I was aware that at some point someone would need them." "Detective," Claudia leaned forward, her tone gentle yet resolute. "Do you comprehend the risks you are undertaking? The department, the union, they will pursue you relentlessly." "They already are," Price responded with a bitter chuckle. "My partner was reassigned last month. My overtime has been reduced. I possess dates and locations." A sharp rap interrupted them. Marcus opened the door to find the court bailiff. "Your Honor, Chief Judge Morton requests your immediate presence in his chambers." Claudia stood, adjusting her robe. "Detective Price, my clerk will take your complete statement. We will require all details to be documented and verified. Price rose, determination superseding the weariness in his eyes. Whatever you require, Your Honor. I am fully committed now. Claudia gathered the files from her desk. Marcus, create secure duplicates of all materials, store them in multiple locations, and obtain the courthouse surveillance recordings for the past 6 months. All of them. She faced Price one last time. Are you absolutely certain? If you stand, I will stand, he repeated firmly. Claudia nodded, placing the files into her briefcase. What had commenced as a case against 2 officers had just escalated into something far more significant. The entrenched system that protected them, the officials who enabled their actions, the very machinery of injustice itself, all of it would be brought to light. She touched her exposed scalp again, feeling the rough patches where their clippers had inflicted their damage. They had intended it as a source of humiliation, never contemplating that it would become the catalyst for something far grander than themselves. Marcus opened her chamber door. Beyond it lay the courthouse, its corridors teeming with the influential individuals who believed they held dominion over it. But today, those corridors would begin to lead toward the truth. The late afternoon sun blazed through the courtroom's tall windows, casting stark shadows across Detective Alan Price's face as he took the witness stand. His hands trembled slightly as he was sworn in, but his voice remained steady. Claudia observed him from the bench, noting the undisguised hostility radiating from the other officers in the gallery. The atmosphere was palpable with tension. Detective Price, the prosecutor commenced, how long did you collaborate with Officers Donnelly and Carnes? 3 years in narcotics, Price replied, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed courtroom. From the year 2020 to the year 2023. And during that period, what patterns of conduct did you observe? Price's gaze flickered momentarily towards Rick and Brent, seated at the defense table. They operated with a systematic approach. They would target specific demographics, minorities, demonstrators, individuals who they believed lacked the resources to mount a defense. They would plant evidence, falsify official reports, and employ excessive force. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Rick's expression darkened, his jaw visibly clenching. Could you provide concrete examples? The prosecutor pressed. Price produced a small notebook. March 15th, 2021. Officers Donnelly and Carnes apprehended Marcus Washington, asserting they discovered cocaine in his vehicle. I personally witnessed Officer Donnelly plant that evidence moments prior to the search. The complaint was subsequently suppressed by Internal Affairs Lieutenant James Morrison. The gallery erupted in gasps. Lieutenant Morrison, seated in the rear row, abruptly stood and exited the courtroom. July 8th, 2021, Price continued, his voice gaining strength. Sarah Chen, a peaceful demonstrator. Officers subjected her to physical abuse while in custody, subsequently charging her with assaulting them. Deputy Chief Williams personally ordered the deletion of the body camera footage. Further gasps ensued. More names, more incidents. With each disclosure, Rick's complexion grew redder, his hands gripping the defense table until his knuckles turned white. The cover-ups extended to the highest echelons, Price testified. Monthly meetings involving Chief Judge Morton, District Attorney Denton, and union representatives. They would determine which cases to bury and which officers to protect. I possessed dates, locations, and documentation for every meeting. Rick suddenly sprang from his chair. You lying piece of garbage, he bellowed, lunging forward. You're dead, Price. Do you hear me? Dead. The courtroom descended into pandemonium. Bailiffs rushed to subdue Rick as Brent attempted to restrain him. Spectators leaped to their feet, some screaming, others endeavoring to record the scene on their mobile devices. Claudia's gavel struck with the force of thunder. Order, she commanded, her voice piercing the chaos. Officer Donnelly, you will either resume your seat or be removed from this courtroom and held in contempt. Rick struggled against the bailiffs, saliva flecking his lips as he shouted, You cannot protect him. You cannot protect any of them. Remove Officer Donnelly, Claudia ordered, her voice like ice, and add witness intimidation to his charges. As the bailiffs dragged Rick away, Price remained composed on the stand, though his grip on the railing tightened. Brent regarded him with calculated malevolence, whispering something to his attorney. "Detective Price," Claudia addressed him directly, "would you like to request a brief recess?" "No, Your Honor," Price responded firmly. "I need to conclude this." The testimony continued for another hour, each revelation more damning than the last. Price presented documented evidence, photocopies of original reports, audio recordings, and dated notes of conversations. The prosecution entered each item as evidence, while the defense attorney's objections became increasingly desperate. When Claudia finally called for a recess, the gallery buzzed with shocked discussions. Reporters hurried from the courtroom, phones already pressed to their ears. Price was escorted out under heavy security, his countenance drawn but resolute. Claudia gathered her documents, observing as Brent was led away by his attorney, his cold eyes conveying promises of reprisal. The courtroom gradually emptied, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the profound implications of what had been unveiled. Later, as the sun began its descent, Claudia walked to her vehicle in the courthouse parking lot. The revelations of the day reverberated in her mind, each name and incident contributing to the vast network of corruption they were exposing. She was so engrossed in contemplation that she failed to immediately notice the change in her surroundings. Then she saw it. Her car, formerly a pristine black, was now defaced with vibrant red spray paint. "Traitor" was emblazoned across the driver's side in jagged lettering. The tires were slashed. Fragments of glass glittered around the shattered windows, and what appeared to be an acidic substance had corroded the paintwork in several areas. Claudia stood perfectly still, scrutinizing the damage with clinical detachment. Other courthouse employees passing by gasped and offered hushed words of sympathy, but she barely registered them. The message was unambiguous. They were escalating, moving from humiliation to outright destruction. First her hair, now her vehicle. An ordinary individual might have experienced fear, but Claudia felt something entirely different. Certainty. She touched her exposed scalp, feeling the rough patches that had yet to fully heal, and silently examined her vandalized car. The red paint dripped like blood in the fading sunlight. Each letter served as a testament to the desperation of those who had considered themselves beyond reproach. Marcus was diligently reviewing the transcripts of Detective Price's testimony in his office when his phone vibrated. Lydia Cruz's name appeared on the screen. He answered immediately, concerned by her rapid respiration. "Marcus," Lydia's voice trembled. "I need to see you immediately, please. It's about what happened to Judge Hayes." "Lydia, take a breath. What is wrong?" "Not over the telephone. Meet me in the parking garage, level B2. Please hurry." Marcus found Lydia pacing between the concrete pillars of the nearly deserted garage. Her usually neat court clerk's uniform was rumpled, and her hands refused to cease their trembling. Upon seeing him, she practically ran towards him. "I can't keep it any longer," she whispered, glancing around nervously. "They know I possess it. They are observing me." "Possess what?" Marcus inquired, though a sinking premonition suggested he already knew. Lydia reached into her purse, withdrew a small black USB drive. "I was present that morning in the security office when those officers—" her voice faltered. "I recorded everything they did to Judge Hayes, the entire incident on my phone." Marcus's eyes widened. "You have footage of the assault?" She nodded frantically. "I transferred it to this drive. But this morning, Chief Judge Whitaker summoned me to his office. He was different. Cold. He inquired if I had witnessed anything unusual that morning. He stated that it would be advisable if I forgot anything I might have observed." Marcus took the drive, his hand steady despite his racing heart. "Did you inform him about the recording?" "No, but he is aware. Someone must have observed me." The security officer who was scheduled to monitor the cameras that morning has been reassigned. "And my supervisor," Lydia's voice cracked, "she advised me to be cautious about what I say, that some matters are best left unaddressed." Marcus slipped the drive into his inner jacket pocket. "We will protect you, Lydia. Judge Hayes will not permit them to." "You do not comprehend." Lydia grabbed his arm. "Chief Judge Whitaker, he is not merely covering for those officers, he is safeguarding something of greater magnitude." "The manner in which he regarded me," she shuddered. "Promise me you will keep that secure, and please do not let them know I provided it to you." "I promise," Marcus stated solemnly. "Go home, Lydia. Attempt to act as though nothing has occurred. We will manage this." He watched her hurry away, her footsteps echoing in the concrete structure. As soon as she departed, he contacted Claudia. Less than 3 hours later, his phone rang again. This time, it was Claudia. "They terminated her," she stated without preamble, her voice taut with restrained fury. "Lydia just contacted me in tears." They physically removed her from the premises, asserting that she had disregarded court procedures and mishandled classified information. Marcus vehemently condemned the recorded evidence, lamenting that the authentic copy was no longer accessible, supposedly due to a technical glitch during the transfer process. Furthermore, the documentation detailing the chain of custody had also inexplicably vanished. Claudia paused, her voice cutting through the silence. "Marcus, where are you?" "Almost to your chambers. I haven't let this drive out of my sight," he replied. "Excellent. Make haste." Upon Marcus's arrival, he found Claudia standing by her window, her gaze fixed on the illuminated cityscape. Her reflection in the glass revealed her shaven scalp, a perpetual emblem of their struggle. "I observed Whitaker departing earlier," she remarked without turning. "He appeared to be smiling, genuinely smiling, after completely ruining that young woman's professional life." Marcus placed the USB drive on her desk. "He's becoming careless, desperate." "No," Claudia finally turned, her expression resolute. "He's confident. This is his modus operandi. He operates through intermediaries, applies immense pressure, employs veiled threats, and orchestrates sudden dismissals. He's the quintessential bureaucrat, leaving no trace of his actions while systematically undermining the very system he is sworn to uphold." She retrieved the drive, turning it over in her hands. "You comprehend the significance of this, do you not?" Whitaker not only possessed knowledge of the assault, but he had also sanctioned it. It was likely his direct orchestration. "But why?" Marcus inquired. "Why target you so openly?" "Because I was getting too close." Claudia moved towards her desk, producing a key. "Those cases I've been reviewing, the ones that seem to evaporate without a trace, allegations of brutality, misconduct charges, violations of civil rights, all dismissed or suppressed under his authority. He has been shielding corrupt law enforcement officers for years, likely receiving illicit payments from the union." She unlocked her bottom drawer, revealing a concealed compartment with a false bottom which housed a small safe. "And now we possess irrefutable proof, not merely of what was inflicted upon me, but of the lengths to which they will go to conceal it." The safe clicked open. Claudia deposited the drive within, then meticulously restored everything to its original state. "Lydia risked everything to procure this footage for us. We shall not permit her sacrifice to be in vain." She secured the drawer, her movements precise and deliberate. In the hushed solitude of her chambers, her whispered words resonated with an unyielding resolve. "Not this time." Marcus observed her, profoundly moved by the unwavering determination etched in her demeanor. Despite the relentless barrage of adversities they had subjected her to, the humiliation, the intimidation, the destruction of critical evidence, she remained unbroken. If anything, each assault had only served to fortify her conviction. The city lights cast elongated shadows through the window pane, and somewhere within the building, Chief Judge Whitaker was likely seated in his office, convinced he had achieved another victory. However, he failed to grasp the true nature of his opponent. This conflict transcended the actions of a single judge or an isolated act of cruelty. It was a battle for the very essence of justice, a cause for which Claudia Hayes had dedicated her life. The dawn light filtered through the expansive windows of Chief Judge Whitaker's office as Claudia entered. He stood behind his imposing mahogany desk, embodying the image of a perfectly composed bureaucrat in his impeccably tailored robes. His smile was practiced, professional, and utterly disingenuous. "Judge Hayes," he said, gesturing towards a plush leather chair, "please be seated." Claudia remained standing. "I prefer to keep this concise, Chief." "As you wish." He adjusted his tie, a subtle tell she had long observed. "I will be direct then. There are concerns regarding your continued involvement in the Donnelly Carnes case." "Concerns?" Claudia's voice was as smooth as ice. "From whom?" "Various parties." Whitaker ambled around his desk slowly. "The defense has presented valid arguments concerning potential partiality. The police union is threatening formal grievances. Even some of our colleagues perceive the situation as having become untenable." "You mean my assault has become untenable?" Whitaker visibly flinched at the word assault. "That regrettable incident is precisely why you should consider recusing yourself. The appearance of a conflict of interest." "There is no conflict," Claudia interjected firmly. "I am more than capable of maintaining judicial impartiality." "No one doubts your capabilities, Claudia." His use of her first name sent a shiver down her spine. "However, we must uphold the dignity of the court." "The media attention alone, the dignity of the court?" "Dignity." Claudia's laughter was sharp and derisive. "Where was your concern for dignity when 2 officers forcibly escorted me into a back room and shaved my head?" Whitaker's carefully constructed facade faltered momentarily. "That matter is currently undergoing an internal investigation." "By whom?" "The same individuals who systematically suppressed Deputy Wallace's complaints of harassment." His eyes narrowed. "Those complaints were addressed in accordance with established protocols." "Protocols?" Claudia stepped closer to his desk. "I have reviewed the pertinent files, Chief. Every complaint lodged against Wallace was marked as reviewed and subsequently dismissed, bearing your signature on each one." Color drained from Whitaker's face. "You are not authorized to access those records." "I am a federal judge investigating civil rights violations. I possess full authority." She placed both hands flat on his desk, leaning forward conspiratorially. "Just as I possess the authority to question why our district attorney appears more preoccupied with protecting errant officers than with prosecuting them." Harold Denton is an elected official navigating a challenging role. "Harold Denton is a coward who takes his directives from you." Claudia's voice, though quiet, was razor-sharp. "The crucial question, Chief, is who is issuing orders to you?" Whitaker's carefully crafted mask crumbled completely. "You are venturing into perilous territory, Judge Hayes." "Am I? Or am I finally standing on firm ground after years of wading through treacherous terrain?" She straightened up decisively. "You wished for me to recuse myself?" "My request is denied. While this is not a formal motion at present, it will certainly become one, will it not? After you instruct Denton to file it officially, after you convene with the union representatives and guarantee them further suppressed complaints in exchange for their allegiance." Claudia began to move towards the door. "Save yourself the effort. I am committed to seeing this through to its conclusion." "You have absolutely no comprehension of the risks you are undertaking," Whitaker called after her. "Your career, your reputation." "My integrity is not a commodity for negotiation," she retorted. She paused at the threshold of the doorway. "Unlike yours." Claudia's heels echoed with sharp precision on the polished marble floors as she made her way back to her chambers. Her outwardly composed demeanor gave no hint of the internal turmoil churning within her. Each encounter with Whitaker unveiled new strata of corruption, each layer more profoundly disturbing than the last. Marcus was awaiting her arrival in her office, meticulously sorting through a stack of case files. He looked up as she entered. "How grave is the situation?" "Worse than we had initially anticipated." Claudia sank into her chair. "Whitaker is not merely complicit in shielding individual officers, he actively perpetuates an entire system. The complaints of harassment, the allegations of brutality, the violations of civil liberties, They all passed through him first. But to what end? Marcus unfurled several documents across the desk. What is his ultimate objective? Power. Control. Claudia picked up one of the files. Every suppressed complaint represents leverage. Every dismissed case constitutes a favor owed. He has constructed an intricate network of malfeasance with himself at its very epicenter. She opened the file. Another complaint against Wallace, marked dismissed, with Whitaker's distinctive flowing signature. And Denton is an integral part of this. The district attorney's office does not pursue cases without Whitaker's explicit approval. They likely collaborate on determining which officers to protect and which cases to bury. A judge and a district attorney collaborating to obstruct justice, Marcus stated quietly. It's akin to a malignant growth within the system. No. Claudia closed the file with a decisive snap. The system itself is the malignancy. Whitaker and Denton are merely the symptoms. She lightly touched her shaven scalp, feeling the rough textures where the officers had inflicted their brutality. We mistakenly believed we were confronting a handful of corrupt individuals, but the scope of this conspiracy is far more extensive. She rose and walked to her window, her gaze sweeping over the courthouse steps, where a small contingent of protesters still gathered daily. The judiciary, the very institution entrusted with the vital task of restraining unchecked power and safeguarding fundamental rights, has been fundamentally compromised. She turned back to Marcus, her expression hardening with grim resolve. And Whitaker, she continued, he is not merely participating in this corruption, he has elevated it to an art form. Marcus began to gather the files, his movements careful and deliberate. What is our next course of action? Claudia watched a group of young legal professionals hurrying up the courthouse steps, their faces alight with youthful eagerness and idealism. She pondered how many of them would eventually learn to turn a blind eye, how many would be compelled to choose between their moral compass and their professional advancement. We continue to perform our duties, she stated, her voice firm. We adhere to the law, we protect the innocent, and we expose the truth, regardless of how unpleasant it may be or how high up the chain of command it may lead. The morning news broke like a devastating wave. Claudia sat in her kitchen, her coffee growing cold as headline after headline flashed across her television screen. Federal judge accused of assaulting deputies, blazed one chyron. Above it, a deliberately cropped security photograph depicted Claudia at the metal detector, her hand raised. Although they had strategically omitted Wallace's aggressive posture towards her, her phone buzzed incessantly with messages from fellow judges, reporters, and even old law school acquaintances. While most expressed concern, a discernible faction had already aligned themselves against her. A text message from a long-standing colleague read, "Perhaps it's time to step back and allow the situation to de-escalate." From her countertop, the radio droned. A talk show host's voice, laced with manufactured indignation, declared, "We are discussing a sitting federal judge who physically confronted security personnel only to subsequently fabricate outlandish accusations to conceal her actions. If she exhibits such instability, how can she possibly be deemed fit to render impartial judgments from the bench?" Claudia switched it off, her hands steady despite the searing anger that burned within her chest. The synchronized nature of these attacks was undeniably clear, a testament to Whitaker's pervasive influence. She had anticipated retaliation, but the sheer speed and breadth of it still managed to astonish her. Her cell phone rang. "Judge, turn on channel 4. Marcus's voice was tight with urgency. She flipped through the channels. A crowd had congregated outside the courthouse, their protest signs clearly visible in the morning light. "Resign now! No biased judges! Support our police!" read several banners. "They're buzzing them in," Marcus explained. "Union organizers, off-duty officers, paid agitators. They've been arriving since dawn, and our supporters are being corralled across the street by riot police under the pretense of security concerns." Of course they were. Claudia watched a man wielding a bullhorn orchestrate chants directed against her, his face contorted with performative outrage. "Any word from Allen?" "Silence on the line." Marcus's voice cracked. "Allen was attacked last night. He's in intensive care at Memorial." The room seemed to sway. How severe are his injuries? They found him in his driveway. Multiple fractures, internal bleeding. Someone worked him over with professional precision, knowing exactly how to inflict severe harm without proving fatal. Claudia was already reaching for her keys. I'm heading there now. Judge, you should be aware. There are reporters camped outside your residence. She paused at her door, peering through the peephole. Sure enough, several news vans were parked along her normally tranquil street. Back door it is, she muttered. 20 minutes later, she slipped into Memorial Hospital through a service entrance, a baseball cap pulled low over her shaven head. The ICU nurse recognized her immediately, but to her credit, simply nodded and guided her to Alan's room. The sight struck her with profound force. Alan lay motionless, his face a swollen mass of purple bruises, tubes snaking from his arms and nose. The steady, rhythmic beep of the monitors provided a somber soundtrack to the scene. The doctors are optimistic that he will survive, the nurse offered quietly. However, his recovery process will likely span several months. Claudia pulled a chair close to his bedside. Despite the extensive bruising, she could discern the methodical nature of the assault, the deliberate breaking of bones, while meticulously avoiding any fatal damage. This was not a random act of violence, it was a calculated message. Alan's eyes fluttered open, his focus slowly sharpening. Judge Hayes, his voice was barely a whisper. I am here. Please do not attempt to speak. He swallowed with evident pain. They demanded the files from my personal safe. Years of records. His breath hitched. I refused to relinquish them. Claudia's grip on his hand tightened almost imperceptibly. You should have. No. Despite his grievous injuries, Alan's gaze was fierce. Those files substantiate everything. The systematic cover-ups, the illicit payoffs, the intimidation of witnesses, all of it leads directly back to Whitaker and Denton. Alan, they nearly killed you, but they did not succeed. He managed a broken smile. The files are secure, concealed in a location they will never discover. Tell me where. I will retrieve them myself. He shook his head slightly, wincing with pain. Not yet. It remains too perilous. We must await the opportune moment. His eyes began to glaze over, the potent pain medication taking effect. This must cease, Claudia murmured softly. The violence, the corruption, all of it. I will not allow what they inflicted upon you to have been in vain. I know, his voice was fading. That is precisely why I trust you. He drifted into a medicated sleep, his battered features relaxing slightly. Claudia remained with him for another hour, observing the gentle rise and fall of his chest, each breath a small triumph against those who sought to silence him. When she finally departed the hospital, the sun was beginning its descent. She deliberately chose a circuitous route home, constantly vigilant for any signs of surveillance, finally pulling into her garage as dusk settled. The reporters had largely dispersed, leaving only a few persistent individuals with cameras. As she reached for her front door, her attention was drawn to a white envelope taped at eye level. Inside was a single photograph. Alan's unconscious form in his driveway, blood pooling beneath him. On the reverse, written in stark block letters, were the words, "Next time, we won't stop." Claudia's hands remained steady as she carefully placed the photograph into an evidence bag. Her assailants intended to instill fear, to compel her to withdraw, to recuse herself, and to permit the pervasive corruption to continue unchecked. Yet standing there in the encroaching darkness, clutching tangible proof of their escalating brutality, Claudia felt a sensation that transcended mere fear. It was something more profound, something harder, something that had been steadily crystallizing since the moment they first applied those clippers to her head. The courthouse loomed ahead like a formidable fortress under siege. Throngs of protesters occupied the steps, their signs bobbing like agitated waves in a turbulent sea. Police barricades carved a narrow channel through the chaotic scene, but even from her vehicle, Claudia could discern the competing chants. Justice for cops! roared one faction. Stand with Judge Hayes, countered another. Claudia straightened her suit jacket, her fingers brushing against the smooth skin where her hair once grew. The morning sun glinted off the chrome of news vans lining the street, their satellite dishes reaching skyward like metallic trees. Marcus was waiting at the service entrance, his customary warm smile replaced by eyes etched with worry. "Good morning, Judge. It's quite intense out there." "Nothing we haven't navigated before," Claudia replied, although they both understood this was an understatement. "This situation feels different." The very air crackled with palpable tension. They proceeded through the loading dock, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. Security guards observed their passage, their faces carefully impassive. In this atmosphere of suspicion, no one knew whom to trust. As they neared her chambers, a sudden commotion erupted in the main corridor. Men in somber suits moved with purposeful strides through the courthouse, their FBI badges catching the light. "Federal investigators," Marcus whispered. "They arrived 20 minutes ago." The lead agent, a stern-faced woman with striking silver hair, spotted Claudia and altered her course. "Judge Hayes, I am Special Agent Diana Chen. We need to speak with you." Claudia gestured towards her office. "Of course." Inside, Agent Chen wasted no time in articulating her purpose. "We have initiated a formal investigation into systemic corruption within this courthouse. The assault on Detective Price was the catalyst for federal involvement." "About time," Marcus muttered under his breath. Chen's eyes narrowed slightly. "We are particularly interested in Chief Judge Whitaker's complicity in suppressing evidence pertaining to police misconduct and the District Attorney's Office's role in concealing civilian complaints." "I possess documentation," Claudia stated calmly. "Files that unequivocally demonstrate the established pattern. We will require those." Chen paused. "Judge Hayes, you should be aware that significant pressure is being exerted to discontinue this investigation. Powerful individuals are determined to see this matter buried." "They always are." Claudia's voice was measured but firm. "However, I will not be intimidated." A sharp knock interrupted their exchange. Marcus opened the door to reveal a court officer. "Judge, they are ready for you." The main courtroom was completely packed. Rick and Brent sat with their respective legal counsel, their arrogance diminished, though not entirely extinguished. The gallery buzzed with an palpable sense of anticipation and unease. As Claudia approached the bench, Chief Judge Whitaker intercepted her. "A word, Claudia?" She noted his deliberate use of her first name, a subtle yet unmistakable attempt to assert dominance. "In open court, Chief," she replied, his smile tightening. "This has escalated far enough. Recuse yourself immediately or face a formal review of your suitability to serve." "Are you issuing a threat, Chief Whitaker?" "I am endeavoring to preserve your career." His voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "Consider your legacy." "I am," Claudia stated firmly, stepping past him. "That is precisely why I am committed to seeing this through to its conclusion." The entire room fell into a profound silence as she ascended to the bench. Through the tall windows, the distant sound of protest chants filtered in like the rumble of approaching thunder. Marcus appeared at her side, discreetly passing her a folded note. "Security footage has been recovered from 3 additional sources. They cannot conceal everything." Claudia allowed herself a small fleeting smile. Truth, she mused, was like water. It invariably found every crack, every vulnerability. They could erect formidable dams of deception and intimidation, but eventually the truth would inevitably break through. She lifted her gavel, its familiar weight settling comfortably in her hand. The protesters' signs were visible through the courthouse windows, their messages of animosity and support vying for attention. However, within the confines of this room, only the unvarnished facts held sway. "Court is in session," she announced, her voice resonating to every corner of the chamber. Rick and Brent shifted uncomfortably. Their newly appointed attorney, clearly retained by the union, shuffled through papers with a forced veneer of confidence. From her elevated vantage point, Claudia could observe Special Agent Chen and her investigative team settling into their seats in the gallery, their notepads poised for action. Chief Judge Whitaker stood at the rear of the room, his expression darkening like an impending storm cloud. Let them watch, Claudia thought. Let them witness what true justice actually entails. Marcus lightly touched her arm. They can disparage you, he whispered, but the truth possesses greater strength. Claudia's fingers found the rough texture of her judicial robe, the garment that symbolized everything she had fought for, everything she held sacred. They had attempted to strip her of her dignity with those clippers, but in doing so, they had only amplified her inner fortitude. The morning sunlight streamed through the high windows, casting elongated shadows across the courtroom floor. Outside, the cacophony of the protest continued, but it seemed distant now, almost irrelevant. This room was her dominion, and within its walls, truth would finally have its day. She gripped her robe more tightly, feeling the immense weight of responsibility, of justice long delayed but undeniably present. The cost no longer mattered. Not her reputation, not her career, not even her personal safety. What held paramount importance was this singular moment, this opportunity to demonstrate that no individual, whether a corrupt law enforcement officer, a compromised judge, or even the system itself, was exempt from the purview of the law. The room held its collective breath, awaiting the unfolding events. Claudia looked down at the defendants, the men who had not only humiliated her, but had also inadvertently exposed the pervasive depth of the corruption she was now dedicated to combating. Their faces registered the first subtle indications of genuine fear. Good, she thought. They should be afraid. Not of me, but of the truth they have so desperately attempted to conceal. The morning sun caught her shaven head, transforming it into a luminous beacon of defiance. She felt the gazes of every individual present in the room, knowing that this moment would not only define her professional trajectory, but also fundamentally shape the very concept of justice within this courthouse. Marcus stood ready at her side, his files meticulously organized, his evidence prepared. Agent Chen observed intently from the gallery. Even Chief Judge Whitaker, despite his numerous threats, was powerless to impede the proceedings that were about to commence. Claudia held her robe as if it were a shield, an unwavering steel backbone, and a burning fire in her heart propelling her forward. The time for hesitation had irrevocably passed. The moment for truth had finally arrived. The courthouse possessed a distinctly different aura after nightfall. Shadows stretched across the deserted hallways, and each footstep seemed to echo like a whispered secret. Claudia sat alone in her chambers, case files spread across her desk, illuminated by the warm glow of her desk lamp. The day's protests had finally subsided, leaving behind only scattered remnants of signage and a lingering undercurrent of tension in the air. Her fingers habitually traced the smooth skin of her scalp, a gesture she had adopted since the assault. Each touch served as a stark reminder of their cruelty, but also, more importantly, of her own unwavering resolve. The accumulation of written threats she had received was neatly stacked, each item meticulously logged and recorded. These were not going to intimidate her into silence. A gentle rapping at her door interrupted her thoughts. It was Judge Hayes. The night watchman, Tom, stood in her office entrance. "Apologies for the intrusion," he said, "but this was just delivered to the security station." He held up a plain manila envelope. "At this late hour," Claudia noted, glancing at her watch, which read 11:23 in the evening. "A young woman dropped it off. She wouldn't give her name, was wearing a hoodie, said it was urgent." Tom placed the envelope on her desk. "Would you like me to remain while you open it?" Claudia shook her head. "I'll be all right, Tom." "Thank you." After he departed, she examined the envelope. It bore no distinguishing marks, no sender's address, only her name typed precisely. Having received numerous such threats, she was accustomed to caution, yet this particular delivery felt distinct. Procuring a letter opener, she carefully sliced open the top. A small flash drive slid out, accompanied by a handwritten note on lined paper. "Judge Hayes," it began. "I regret my flight. They menaced my family, but I could not permit them to suppress the truth. The complete footage is here, unaltered and time-stamped. Use it judiciously." Claudia's heart began to pound. Lydia, the diligent clerk who had risked everything to capture the assault on film. The flash drive felt surprisingly substantial in her palm. Her hands trembled almost imperceptibly as she inserted it into her laptop. A single video file appeared, bearing the date of the incident. Claudia paused, her cursor hovering over the play icon. Did she truly wish to revisit this ordeal? The video commenced. The security camera's perspective displayed the courthouse entrance. There she was, proceeding through the metal detector. Wallace's disdainful grimace was clearly discernible as he summoned Rick and Brent. The audio transmission was remarkably clear. "These documents appear fabricated to me," Rick's voice declared, laced with manufactured suspicion. "I am a federal judge," her recorded self responded calmly. "Indeed you are, sweetheart," Brent chuckled. Claudia watched as she was handcuffed, maintaining her composure even as they roughly grasped her arms. The footage followed them, escorting her to the holding area. It was here that Lydia had discreetly switched to her phone camera, filming through a slightly ajar door. The degrading shaving incident unfolded with stark clarity. Rick's face contorted with a cruel satisfaction as he activated the clippers. Brent's hands gripped her shoulders far too tightly, leaving marks she would discover later. Their laughter echoed through the laptop speakers as her hair detached in tufts. "This will teach you to respect the badge," Rick sneered. "Smile for the camera," Brent taunted, snapping photographs with his phone. Wallace stood observing, neither participating nor intervening. His silent acquiescence was incriminating. Claudia compelled herself to watch every second. Her own stoicism in the video astonished her. She had not faltered, had not pleaded. Each pass of the clippers had only solidified her resolve. The timestamp attested to its authenticity. The angle clearly captured every individual's face. There was no possibility of denying what transpired, no way to misrepresent this as a misunderstanding. She halted the playback, studying the frozen image of Rick's amused expression. How many others had they subjected to such humiliation? How many victims had remained silent, knowing the system would invariably shield the perpetrators? The weight of her predicament seemed to intensify as she contemplated the flash drive's implications. To utilize this evidence would be akin to detonating a bomb within the courthouse's established order. The chief judge, the district attorney, the police union, they had all sought to suppress this event. This would not only expose the assault but the subsequent cover-up. Her career, all her professional accomplishments could become collateral damage. They would brand her as biased, unstable, and unfit for the bench. The right-leaning media would portray her as an activist judge with a predetermined agenda. But was this not precisely the reason she had chosen to become a judge? To ensure that justice prevailed, particularly when individuals in positions of power attempted to thwart it. She opened her briefcase, her fingers tracing the smooth leather interior. Years of legal precedent and case law resided within this bag. Now it would contain something far more explosive than any legal argument. The building groaned and settled around her as she sat in contemplation. From her window, she could discern the protest signs strewn across the courthouse steps, awaiting tomorrow's throngs. The media vehicles would return with the dawn. The spectacle would commence anew. Claudia ejected the flash drive, holding it up to the light. Such a diminutive object to carry such profound significance. Lydia was out there somewhere, likely in a state of apprehension, but she had acted with integrity. Now the responsibility fell to Claudia. Her hand remained steady as she slipped the drive into a secure pocket of her briefcase. Tomorrow would usher in profound change, but tonight, within the quiet solitude of her chambers, she felt an unwavering certainty. She gathered her documents, tidied her workspace. The lamplight cast her shadow upon the wall, her head held high, unyielding. They had intended to disgrace her with the shaving incident, but they had inadvertently bestowed upon her a formidable defense. Every gaze that met her bare head tomorrow would bear witness to the brutality they had inflicted and her enduring fortitude. The clock chimed midnight As Claudia closed her briefcase, the flash drive secured within. Tomorrow's hearing loomed, but she was prepared. Truth, as it always did, had found its way to her. Now she would ensure its universal recognition. The federal courthouse thrummed with palpable anticipation. Every seat in the public gallery was occupied. Reporters were packed shoulder to shoulder with advocates for the community and concerned individuals. The atmosphere felt charged, a volatile blend of tension and potential. Camera crews lined the rear wall, their lenses fixed upon the bench. Outside, opposing groups of demonstrators pressed against barricades, their shouts muffled by the substantial courthouse walls. Signs bobbed above the masses, some demanding Claudia's removal, others commending her bravery. Rick and Brent occupied the defense table, their customary swagger replaced by anxious glances. Their legal counsel frantically shuffled papers, already sensing the shift in momentum. The prosecution's table was conspicuously vacant. District Attorney Harold Denton had reported himself ill. A hush descended upon the proceedings as Claudia entered, her judicial robe flowing behind her. The overhead illumination glinted off her shorn scalp, drawing every eye in the room. She assumed her seat with deliberate composure, arranging her files with practiced efficiency. "Court is now in session," the bailiff announced, his voice resonating throughout the silent chamber. Claudia surveyed the crowded gallery, her gaze unwavering. "Before we proceed with today's testimony," she stated, "the court has new evidence to formally enter into the record." She opened a substantial folder. "I hold here the complete disciplinary file of Deputy James Wallace, previously sealed by administrative directive." The defense attorney leapt to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. Those records are protected personnel files." "Overruled." Claudia's voice cut through his protest like a keen blade. "These files were unlawfully sealed to conceal a pattern of misconduct. The public possesses a right to this information." She commenced reading, her clear diction reaching every recess of the room. September 15th, 2015. Deputy Wallace detained and subjected an African-American female attorney to a strip search, alleging her bar card was fraudulent. The complaint was suppressed by Internal Affairs. A low murmur rippled through the gallery. Claudia continued. March 3rd, 2017. 1000. Deputy Wallace employed excessive force against a Hispanic court interpreter, resulting in 3 fractured ribs. Witness testimonies inexplicably vanished from the file. Page after page, year after year, the same pattern emerged. Racial profiling, excessive force, abuse of authority, all systematically concealed by a system designed for self-preservation. Reporters' fingers flew across their keyboards, cameras clicked incessantly. April 22nd, 2023. Claudia paused, her tone hardening. Deputy Wallace aided Officers Donnelly and Carnes in the unlawful detention and assault of a federal judge. She fixed her gaze directly upon Rick and Brent. That judge was myself. Before the defense could lodge another objection, Claudia pressed a button on her desk. The large screens mounted on the courtroom walls flickered to life. The court will now view security footage from that date. The video began to play. The image quality was exceptionally clear, leaving no ambiguity or room for misinterpretation. The gallery watched in stunned horror as the events unfolded. The wrongful arrest, the forced escort to the holding area, the cruel spectacle of the shaving. Gasps echoed through the courtroom at the sound of Rick and Brent's laughter, their taunts now permanently preserved for all to hear. Several jurors covered their mouths in disbelief. A few spectators openly wept. Rick suddenly lurched to his feet, his face flushed with fury. "This is utter nonsense. We were simply performing our duties." "Sit down, Officer Donnelly," Claudia commanded, her voice cutting through his outburst. "You cannot present this," Brent interjected, panic evident in his voice, shattering his usual composure. "We had probable cause. She appeared suspicious." "Officers, control yourselves or you will be removed," Claudia warned, her finger hovering over the bailiff's call button. "Your duty," she continued, her voice resonating with controlled indignation, "was to uphold and administer justice. Instead, you elected to abuse your authority. You chose to humiliate and degrade a citizen whom you were sworn to protect. You embraced cruelty, all the while believing your badges would shield you from accountability. The defense attorney attempted one final, desperate maneuver. Your Honor, you must recuse yourself. This video conclusively demonstrates your personal involvement. Counselor, Claudia interrupted, this video unequivocally proves that your clients assaulted a federal judge within her own courthouse. If anything, it illustrates the extraordinary lengths to which they will go to exploit their power. A commotion at the rear of the courtroom drew everyone's attention. A team of formally dressed individuals entered, led by a tall woman displaying federal credentials. They proceeded purposefully toward the bench. Your Honor, the woman announced, her voice imbued with authority. I am Special Agent Catherine Martinez with the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. We are here to take custody of all courthouse records pertaining to this case and any other instances of misconduct. The defense table erupted in hushed panic. Rick's complexion had shifted from red to pallid. Brent stared resolutely ahead, his jaw clenched tightly. The Department of Justice has determined that this case represents a potential pattern of systemic civil rights violations. Agent Martinez continued. We will be conducting a comprehensive investigation of the courthouse, the police department, and the district attorney's office. Claudia nodded gravely. The court will offer its complete cooperation with the federal investigation. She turned to address the gallery. This case is no longer about a single incident or one judge. It concerns a system that failed its people and power that corrupted those entrusted with serving justice. The federal agents commenced collecting files, their movements efficient and deliberate. Telephones were pressed to ears. The narrative was escalating beyond local jurisdiction, beyond the reach of those who had attempted to bury it. Rick and Brent sat dejected. Their prior bravado had completely evaporated. Their attorneys frantically scribbled notes, but the damage was irreversible. The truth they had strived to suppress was now being broadcast on screens across the nation. Their cruelty was exposed for all to witness. The gallery buzzed with hushed exchanges, the air thick with the palpable sense of history unfolding. Claudia observed it all from the bench, her posture erect, her newly shorn head held high. They had attempted to shame her, to crush her spirit. Instead, they had provided her with the very instrument that would dismantle their entire corrupt edifice. The courtroom was even more densely packed for sentencing day. Every available space was occupied, with individuals standing along the walls. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting elongated shadows across the floor. Rick and Brent sat at the defense table, their orange jumpsuits a stark visual contrast to their former police attire, their shoulders visibly slumped beneath the burden of their guilty verdicts. Deputy Wallace sat apart with his own legal counsel, his face ashen after accepting a plea agreement. Chief Judge Whitaker's seat in the gallery remained conspicuously vacant. He was being processed at the federal courthouse across town, facing his own indictment for years of complicity in covering up police misconduct. The morning news had broadcast footage of FBI agents escorting him from his residence in handcuffs. District Attorney Harold Denton's resignation letter continued to dominate headlines. He had resigned late the previous night, his carefully crafted statement doing little to obscure the scandal that precipitated his departure. His vacant office was already being emptied. Boxes filled with files seized by federal investigators were visible. Claudia entered the courtroom, her robe settling around her shoulders as she took her position at the bench. Her hair had begun to regrow in sparse patches, but she maintained the shaved style, a constant reminder of the underlying reason for their presence. Please rise, the bailiff called. Court is now in session, the Honorable Judge Claudia Hayes presiding. The rustle of people standing filled the room. Claudia surveyed the assembled crowd, noting the presence of several advocates for police reform and civil rights leaders who had supported her throughout the trial. Be seated, she commanded, her voice clear and steady. We are here for sentencing in 3 related cases. She lifted the first file. Deputy James Wallace. Wallace stood unsteadily, his attorney's hand resting on his elbow. Deputy Wallace, you have pleaded guilty to conspiracy against rights, abuse of authority, and obstruction of justice. Your plea agreement acknowledges 27 separate instances of civil rights violations spanning 12 years. Claudia's gaze remained unwavering. Do you have anything to say before sentencing? Wallace's voice cracked. Your Honor, I am deeply sorry. I convinced myself I was following protocol, but I was wrong. Indeed you were, Claudia responded. Based on your cooperation with federal investigators and your guilty plea, this court sentences you to 8 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release. You are permanently barred from any law enforcement or security position. Wallace nodded numbly and returned to his seat. His attorney squeezed his shoulder reassuringly. Officers Richard Donnelly and Brent Carnes, please rise. They stood, the clinking of their chains audible. The jury had found them guilty on all charges: civil rights violations, assault on a federal judge, abuse of authority, and filing false reports. Officer Donnelly, Claudia began, throughout this trial, you have demonstrated a complete lack of remorse. You maintained that your actions were justifiable, even when confronted with irrefutable evidence of your cruelty. Rick's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. Officer Carnes, you attempted to present yourself as the more reasonable partner, yet evidence clearly showed you were often the instigator, encouraging escalation while concealing yourself behind Officer Donnelly's more overt aggression. Brent stared at the floor, unable to meet her gaze. Your actions represent the gravest abuse of police power. You targeted citizens based on their race, fabricated charges to legitimize arrests, and employed violence to intimidate those who dared to question you. Claudia lifted another document. The pre-sentencing report meticulously details 32 prior complaints filed against both of you, all of which were suppressed by a corrupt system. A murmur swept through the gallery. Several of those complainants were present, finally witnessing justice being served. Richard Donnelly, this court sentences you to 12 years in federal prison, followed by 10 years of supervised release. She turned her attention to Brent. Brent Carnes, this court sentences you to 15 years in federal prison, followed by 10 years of supervised release. Both of you are permanently prohibited from holding any law enforcement position and must complete extensive civil rights training prior to your release. Their attorney immediately rose to object, but Claudia continued, her voice rising above his protestations. These sentences reflect not only your assault upon myself, but your prolonged pattern of abuse against this community. You betrayed your badges, your oaths, and the citizens you swore to protect. She looked out at the crowded courtroom, at the faces of those who had suffered under the corrupt system these men embodied. The young public defender Wallace had humiliated, the court interpreter who still bore scars from his assault, the countless others who had been cowed into silence. Let today's sentences serve as an unambiguous message, Claudia declared, her voice resonating throughout the chamber. The law is not a sanctuary for the powerful. It is a weapon for the people. No badge, no robe, no office confers immunity from justice. The gallery erupted in sustained applause. The bailiff made no attempt to quiet them. This court has one final order, Claudia continued once the room had settled. All case files previously sealed by Chief Judge Whitaker will be thoroughly reviewed by an independent commission. Every complaint that was suppressed, every voice that was silenced will finally be heard. Rick and Brent were led away in chains, their former swagger replaced by defeated shuffling. Wallace followed, his head bowed. Years of unchecked power concluded with the click of handcuffs. Reporters hurried from the courtroom, racing to disseminate the story. Civil rights lawyers embraced their clients, some weeping with profound relief. The machinery of justice, so long mired in the quagmire of corruption, had finally begun to turn. Claudia remained seated at her bench, observing the unfolding scene. She recalled that morning in the holding room, the sensation of the clippers against her scalp, their laughter as her hair fell away. They had sought to shatter her spirit. Instead, they had ignited a movement that would fundamentally reshape the entire judicial system. The federal investigation was expanding daily, reaching into other precincts, other courthouses. Whitaker's indictment had irrevocably opened decades of sealed files. Denton's resignation was merely the prelude to a broader cleansing within the district attorney's office. Weeks had elapsed since the sentencing. The courthouse hallways presented a transformed aspect, not merely physically with new security protocols and civilian oversight stations, but in spirit. Where fear and intimidation had once held sway, there was now a palpable atmosphere of accountability and profound respect. Claudia traversed these reformed corridors, her footsteps echoing on the marble floors. Staff members offered respectful nods as she passed. A young public defender offered a whispered "thank you" as they crossed paths. Even the new security officers, meticulously vetted and rigorously trained under reformed standards, carried themselves with an air of professionalism rather than swagger. The reforms were evident in every corner. Through the transparent walls of the training room, she could observe officers participating in mandatory bias awareness seminars. Down another corridor, members of the Civilian Oversight Board meticulously reviewed complaint files in their newly established office. Public audit reports were prominently displayed in the lobby, detailing response times, incidents of force, and resolutions of complaints. Marcus hurried towards her, a tablet in hand. "Judge Hayes, have you seen the news?" She hadn't needed to. The whispers had been circulating throughout the morning. The office of the president had issued a statement announcing her nomination as chief judge of the district. The official announcement lauded her unwavering courage in confronting corruption and her steadfast commitment to revolutionizing the justice system. "It's all over every network," Marcus continued, displaying the headlines to her. "The Senate Judiciary Committee is expediting your confirmation hearings." Claudia touched the smooth skin of her head, a gesture that had become almost involuntary. "What truly matters is not the position, Marcus," she stated. "It's what we accomplish with it." They reached her chambers, where several community leaders were already waiting. Reverend James Thompson, who had diligently organized peaceful protests throughout the trial, stepped forward to shake her hand. "Judge Hayes, you have achieved what decades of activism could not. You have transformed personal humiliation into systemic reform." Dr. Maria Rodriguez, head of the local Civil Rights Coalition, nodded in agreement. "The oversight boards are already demonstrating tangible results. Complaint processing times have decreased by 70%. Officers now think twice before employing excessive force. And it's not confined to this jurisdiction," added Professor Chen from the law school. "Other districts are adopting our reforms. They are referring to it as the Hayes model. Mandatory bias education, citizen oversight panels, transparent grievance mechanisms." Claudia absorbed their accounts, sensing the shift from resignation to optimism in their tone. These were individuals who had advocated for transformation for years, only to be thwarted by established powers. Now they were active participants in renovation, their insights valued and integrated. The substantive work is just commencing. Claudia impressed upon them. "We must ensure these alterations are enduring, that they persist beyond any single individual or administration." Following the assembly, Claudia sought a moment of solitude in private quarters. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, suffusing the space with warmth. She gazed into the looking glass, examining her countenance. Her hand returned to her head, this time with deliberate intention rather than an ingrained reflex. The smooth scalp, once a mark of her degradation, had transformed into something entirely different. Each dawn, she meticulously shaved it, not to conceal the uneven regrowth, but to uphold what had evolved into a symbol. Women throughout the community had begun mirroring her action in solidarity. Aspiring legal professionals adopted closely cropped hairstyles in defiance of the antiquated system. What was intended to humiliate her had become a badge of resistance. On her workstation rested a compilation of reforms awaiting implementation, novel training methodologies, accountability frameworks, and community engagement initiatives. The undertaking ahead was substantial, yet for the first time in decades, genuine progress seemed attainable. A gentle tap on her door broke her reverie. It was Lydia Cruz, the clerk whose recorded evidence had been pivotal in resolving the matter. She had been reinstated with retroactive pay and elevated to the position of oversight coordinator. Judge Hayes, the afternoon proceedings are prepared to commence. Claudia inclined her head, donning her judicial robe. Its weight felt distinct now, not merely an emblem of authority, but a pledge to guarantee that equity was genuinely dispensed. The procession to the courtroom was lined with new visages. Junior clerks recruited for their dedication to reform. Seasoned staff members who had discovered the fortitude to report transgressions. Representatives from the community, now possessing a substantive voice within the framework. At the courthouse entrance, Marcus presented her with the afternoon schedule. "Prepared, Your Honor." "Always," she responded, straightening her posture. The public gallery was occupied as she entered, but the atmosphere had undergone a metamorphosis from the tense days of the trial. These were not countenances etched with apprehension or fury, but animated with purpose and optimism. Defense attorneys were seated with assurance alongside their clients. Law enforcement officers stood with deference, their recent instruction evident in their comportment. Civilian observers diligently recorded notes from their assigned positions, their role of scrutiny now officially acknowledged. The bailiff's voice resonated. "All rise. Court is now in session. The Honorable Judge Claudia Hayes presiding." Claudia assumed her station at the bench, surveying the assembly. She recognized familiar faces among the community leaders, law students, and reform proponents who had sustained her through the most challenging periods. However, she also observed new individuals, those who had summoned the courage to pursue justice, confident that the system would now attend to them. The afternoon sun gleamed on the polished surface of the gavel. Claudia lifted it, feeling its gravitas, no longer simply an emblem of order imposed through power, but of justice served through veracity and accountability. As she brought it down, the sound reverberated throughout the chamber. The day's proceedings would commence, cases would be adjudicated, equity would be served, and this time it would be authentic equity. Not the hollow charade of the past system, but the genuine safeguarding of liberties and dignity that every individual merited. I trust you found that narrative engaging. Kindly disseminate it among your acquaintances and subscribe to ensure you do not miss subsequent installments. In the interim, I have personally selected 2 narratives for your consideration, which I believe you will find enjoyable. Have a most excellent day.